Honestly, we've all got that pile of games we swear we'll finish someday, right? But some titles they don't let you quit. They earn it. So look, no filler, no fluff, just the real deal. This is the list of definitive single-player games.
Starting with Doom Eternal, which takes the 2016 reboot's philosophy, kill enemies to get resources, and just cranks every dial to 11. You're not just shooting anymore, you're managing ammo through your chainsaw, health through glory kills, armor through flame belches. So combat becomes this constant, frantic resource loop, where standing still to just aim carefully is basically a death sentence. It wants you moving, always moving, dashing, double jumping, grappling onto enemies midair with the meat hook. The arena encounters are meticulously designed puzzles disguised as chaos. You're reading enemy types, prioritizing threats, juggling 3 different combat loops simultaneously. And it genuinely rewards mastering that rhythm, rather than just having a fast trigger finger. Platforming sections got a lot more prominent here too, which, look, not everyone loved that shift. Some people just wanted pure demon slaughter without the jumping puzzles. The metal soundtrack deserves a mention as well. It's doing serious work keeping that adrenaline up. It's aggressive, it's exhausting in the best way, and it's probably the purest distillation of power fantasy shooting on this whole list.
At the end of the world, there's a dead body behind the hostile cafeteria.
After a long session of cracking demon skulls, Disco Elysium offers a different kind of mental torture. It doesn't really play like a game so much as it plays like your own brain arguing with itself, which is honestly the whole point. You're an alcoholic detective who's forgotten literally everything, including his own name. And instead of a health bar, your stats are internal voices. Logic, empathy, electrochemistry, all constantly chiming in, contradicting each other, sometimes actively sabotaging you. There's no combat in the traditional sense, no swords, no guns really used properly. It's almost entirely dialogue and skill checks, and yet somehow the tension is higher than most action games manage. Failing a check doesn't just close a door either. Half the time it opens something weirder and funnier than the version where you'd succeeded. The writing does an enormous amount of heavy lifting. Dense, darkly funny, genuinely political without being preachy. The final cut adds full voice acting too, which somehow makes the internal chaos land even harder. It's not for everyone. There's a lot of reading.
Precinct 41.
There is a huge world to explore, set across a range of America's heartland and frontier.
Red Dead Redemption 2 moves at its own pace, and that's kind of divisive, honestly. Some people bounce right off the slow horse rides and the lengthy camp cutscenes, but stick with it and you realize the slowness is doing something deliberate. It's building this genuinely lived-in world where skinning an animal takes actual time, where your horse remembers how you've treated it, where Arthur Morgan's coat gets visibly dirty from riding through mud. The gunplay itself is weighty, deliberate. Deadeye lets you tag targets in slow motion, but it's balanced enough that you're not just steamrolling every encounter. What really carries the game, though, is Arthur's arc. Watching a violent outlaw slowly reckon with his own mortality and crumbling found family is some of the best character writing in any open-world game, period. Side encounters aren't just filler either. Random strangers you meet on the road often loop back with genuinely surprising consequences later. It's a long game, but the sheer craft on display, the world detail, the writing, makes that length feel earned rather than padded. Hades takes the roguelike formula, die, restart, try again, and solves its biggest problem, which is that dying usually just feels like punishment. Here, every death actually pushes the story forward. You're chatting with gods and family members back in the House of Hades, relationships deepen, plot threads unfold, so failure becomes narrative fuel instead of a dead end. Combat itself is fast, fluid, genuinely stylish. Each weapon handles completely differently. The sword's all quick combos, the spear's got reach and a charge attack, the bow rewards careful positioning. Boon combinations from different gods stack in some delightfully broken ways too. Mixing Zeus's chain lightning with Eris's doom effect can turn a run into an absolute massacre. The voice acting carries a lot of weight. Genuinely funny, well-written, Greek mythology reimagined with real personality rather than just borrowed iconography. And the art direction, that hand-painted, richly colored underworld, still looks fantastic years later. It's demanding but never punishing in a way that feels unfair, and that balance is exactly why it's held up as basically the modern roguelike benchmark.
I gotta ask,
What's the most important thing in life?
Cyberpunk 2077 had, let's be honest, a rough launch, but the game underneath all that has always been genuinely ambitious, and several years of patches and the Phantom Liberty expansion have finally let that ambition actually breathe. Night City itself is the real star. Vertically dense, neon-soaked, every district feels distinct, from corpo high-rises to the chaos of Pacifica. Combat blends gunplay with cyberware abilities. You can go full stealth with optical camo, or just charge in with a Mantis Blade build, slicing through enemies. And the build variety genuinely changes how missions play out. V's story, wrestling with a dying rockstar's digital ghost living in their head, gives the whole thing real emotional stakes. And Keanu Reeves as Johnny Silverhand is doing more acting than you'd expect from a licensed cameo. Side quests here are frequently better written than the main story beats. Some of them rival the best writing in the genre. It's not a perfect game, even now. Some systems still feel a little thin, but as a cyberpunk fantasy realized at scale, it's genuinely unmatched.
Portal 2 takes a genuinely elegant core mechanic. Shoot two portals, walk through one, come out the other, and builds an entire physics-based puzzle language out of it that somehow never runs out of new ideas. Early puzzles teach you momentum conservation, later ones layer in light bridges, gel that makes you bounce or sprint, tractor beams, and each new element gets combined with everything before it in ways that keep genuinely surprising you. The pacing is just about perfect too. Puzzles escalate steadily without ever feeling like padding. But what really elevates it is the writing. GLaDOS is one of gaming's best antagonists. Dry, cruel, weirdly sympathetic by the end, and Wheatley's arc adds this whole other layer of comedy and betrayal in the back half. Co-op mode, played as two robots solving puzzles together, is basically its own separate masterclass in level design, requiring actual communication rather than parallel play. It's a short game, relatively speaking, but there's no fat on it. Every puzzle earns its place, and the humor never undercuts how clever the mechanics actually are. Ghost of Tsushima leans hard into cinematic samurai fantasy, and honestly, it mostly earns that swagger. Combat is stance-based. You're switching between 4 different stances depending on enemy type, and one-on-one standoffs, where you're just staring down an opponent waiting for the right moment to strike, feel genuinely tense in a way most action games don't bother attempting. Jin's internal conflict, honorable samurai versus the underhanded ghost tactics actually needed to win a guerrilla war, gives the story real texture. It's not just style over substance. The world design deserves real credit too. Instead of map markers cluttering everything, wind guides you toward points of interest. Foxes lead you to shrines. It's a small touch, but it keeps you actually looking at the world instead of the minimap. Environments are stunning. Golden fields, misty forests, and the game leans into that with a dedicated photo mode that's become almost as popular as combat itself. It's not mechanically the deepest action game here, but as a mood piece, as a samurai power fantasy, it's genuinely one of the best executed.
The sacred gift. Christ.
Resident Evil 4, the remake, had an unenviable job, updating a game widely considered one of the best ever made without breaking what made it special, and it mostly threads that needle. Over-the-shoulder aiming, tense inventory management with that satisfying attaché case Tetris, the flow of combat against the Ganado villagers, all of it's here. But with modernized movement, you can actually strafe now, which sounds small but genuinely changes encounter pacing. The parry mechanic is new too, timing a knife block to stagger enemies, and it adds a real skill layer that rewards aggressive, confident play over just backpedaling and shooting. Resource scarcity still drives the tension. You're always doing math on whether you can afford to waste ammo on a given enemy. Leon's dry, kind of self-aware humor got dialed back slightly from the original's campier tone, which some fans missed, honestly. But the horror atmosphere benefits from playing it a bit straighter. It's a genuine masterclass in remaking a classic, respectful of the source material while still feeling like its own confident modern thing.
You're kidding.
At CD Projekt Red, it has always been our goal to take you on adventures both legendary and grounded in reality.
The Witcher 3 builds one of the most convincingly lived-in open worlds ever made, and it does that mostly through writing, honestly, not just scale. Side quests here regularly outclass main story missions in other RPGs. A simple bounty hunt can spiral into a genuinely tragic morality tale with no clean answer. Combat mixes swordplay with sign magic and alchemy, and while it's not the deepest system mechanically, it's serviceable enough to stay out of the way of what the game actually wants you doing, which is talking to people and making impossible choices. Geralt himself is a great anchor for it too. World-weary, dryly sarcastic, but never a blank cipher. He's got real opinions, even as the player steers his choices. The Blood and Wine expansion in particular might be some of the best DLC ever produced, a whole additional region with its own distinct tone. It's a long game, dense with content, and not every side activity lands, but for sheer narrative craft wrapped around an open world, it's still the gold standard most RPGs get measured against.
Why do you work alone, Batman?
Arkham City expanded on Arkham Asylum's free-flow combat by, well, giving you an entire district to be Batman in, and that scale shift changes the whole feel. Combat still centers on that satisfying rhythm of counters and combos, chaining takedowns across a room full of thugs while the combo counter climbs, and the enemy variety keeps forcing you to actually read attack tells rather than button mash. Gliding and grapple traversal across the open city adds this real sense of momentum too. Swooping between rooftops feels genuinely great, distinctly better than the corridor-based movement of the first game. The detective vision, scanning crime scenes for clues, gives you these quieter investigative beats between the action, a nice change of pace. Villain variety is the real highlight here though. Mr. Freeze's boss fight alone forces you to constantly adapt since he counters repeated tactics. The story, weaving together Joker, Two-Face, Ra's al Ghul, and more, stays surprisingly coherent given how much it's juggling. It's a genuine high point for the superhero genre, confident in its combat and generous with its content.
Take a life to save the world.
And unending swarms of ravenous rats.
Is anyone there?
A Plague Tale Innocence pairs a genuinely bleak medieval setting, plague-ravaged France, with a mechanic that becomes its central threat: rats. In swarms so dense they move like a living tide, devouring anything without a light source to hold them back. That light management becomes the core puzzle throughout. Torches, braziers, alchemical fire, you're constantly juggling illumination and darkness to steer these swarms into enemies rather than yourself. Combat itself stays intentionally limited. Amicia's got a sling and some crude alchemy, and that's largely it. No combo trees, no upgrade sprawl, which keeps the tension grounded in vulnerability rather than power fantasy. The bond between Amicia and her sickly younger brother Hugo carries most of the emotional weight, and it earns that weight. Their relationship actually evolves meaningfully as Hugo's condition worsens and his own abilities start manifesting. Stealth sections require real patience. Guards react believably to noise and light. It's a shorter, more linear experience than most on this list, but it uses that focus well. Nothing here overstays its welcome.
Pave her journey.
You know, sometimes you feel like starting up a game, but your sanity says no. That's Elden Ring. It takes From Software's usual demanding combat, punishing enemies, methodical stamina management, and drops it into a genuinely massive open world. And somehow, that combination doesn't dilute the difficulty, it just gives you more ways around it. Stuck on a boss? Ride off and find another path, another dungeon, another build option. The game trusts you to reroute rather than just banging your head against one wall. Combat itself covers a huge range too, from slow, heavy strength builds to nimble dexterity fencing to full-on sorcery, and multiplayer summons let you tackle brutal fights cooperatively if solo isn't landing. The world design rewards genuine curiosity. That distant tower you can see from miles away is very likely reachable, and usually hiding something worth the detour. Bosses remain the emotional core. Towering cinematic fights that demand you actually learn their patterns rather than overpower them with numbers. It's an enormous game, easily the biggest From Software has made, but the scale never feels like padding, it feels like freedom, which is honestly rare for games this difficult.
The realm of shadow. I will not be far.
Ever wondered what it will be like if they remade Final Fantasy VII but kept parts of the classic turn-based combat? Clair Obscur did that by taking the turn-based JRPG structure and welds real-time reflexes onto it, and that combination alone makes it feel genuinely fresh in a genre that's leaned pretty formulaic for years.
You're still picking commands from a menu, but incoming attacks require actual timed dodges and parries. Miss the window and you eat full damage, nail it and you can counter directly into the enemy's combo. The premise carries real weight too. An entity called the Paintress erases everyone above a certain age each year, so your whole expedition is racing against a literal countdown, and that mortality theme runs through the writing constantly. Each character handles distinctly. One builds stacking elemental stains, another shifts between offensive and defensive stances mid-fight, so party composition genuinely changes your approach to encounters. The Belle Epoque art direction, painterly, melancholic, gives it a visual identity distinct from most JRPGs on shelves right now. It's a small studio's first game, which makes the ambition on display even more impressive, and it's already being talked about as one of the best turn-based RPGs in years.
Return to the kingdom of Hallownest and
Hollow Knight builds an entire kingdom out of decay, and somehow makes that decay gorgeous. This hand-drawn insect world full of crumbling architecture and quiet, melancholic music. Movement is the real engine of the whole experience. Your dash, wall jump, and eventually double jump keep unlocking new routes through areas you'd already explored, so the map keeps rewarding you for remembering dead ends. Combat is tight and demanding, a simple nail swing paired with spells you charge up, and boss fights genuinely test your pattern recognition without ever feeling cheap about it. Charm customization adds a nice layer of build variety too. Swapping loadouts changes your whole playstyle. More aggressive, more defensive, more mobility focused. The world design deserves special mention. It's one of the best examples of interconnected map design in the genre. Everything loops back on itself in ways that feel intentional rather than maze-like. It's a demanding game. Some optional bosses are borderline sadistic, but the sheer density of content packed into this small studio's debut is genuinely remarkable, and it set the bar the entire genre has been chasing since.
world of insects and heroes when
Kingdom Come Deliverance II doubles down on what made the original so divisive and honestly so beloved. This commitment to grounded, no-magic medieval realism, where even basic sword fighting takes real practice to not just embarrass yourself. Combat uses a directional system. You're actually aiming strikes and blocks at specific angles, and early on, you will lose fights to random bandits. That's just part of the design. The world's now split across 2 large connected regions instead of 1, and the level of period detail is honestly obsessive. Alchemy recipes follow real historical methods. Armor degrades and needs actual maintenance. Your reputation with local communities visibly shapes how NPCs treat you. Henry remains a great everyman lead too, in over his head trying to survive court politics he barely understands. Side quests frequently spiral into genuinely thorny moral situations with no clean solution. It's a demanding, sometimes punishing game, definitely not for players wanting quick power fantasies. But for historical immersion specifically, nothing else on shelves right now even attempts to compete with it.
But I wouldn't go in there for a golden pig.
Major boarding school in Britain.
Always at the top of his class.
Always at odds with authority. Same thing in the Navy.
His superior.
People said this is Hitman with hair and Uncharted with a tuxedo. Anyway, 007 First Light reimagines Bond as a rookie, years before the tuxedo and the martinis, and that choice lets IO Interactive lean hard into what they already do best, systemic stealth, since this is the studio behind Hitman. You're working with an instinct meter here, a resource that fills as you complete objectives and lets you pull off quick lures, bluffs, or split-second precision shots, so it rewards patient, observant play over just running and gunning. Gadgets feel genuinely purposeful too, a hacking watch, a laser cutter, tools that open up alternate routes rather than existing as one-off gimmicks. Combat, when it does break out, borrows some of that Arkham-style flow, chaining takedowns between enemies with real physicality. The driving section's got some criticism for feeling a bit bolted on compared to everything else. Fair criticism, honestly. They're not as dynamic as the stealth work. But the cinematic set pieces land well, and Patrick Gibson brings a younger, raw energy to Bond that actually justifies telling an origin story instead of just another mission.
This training will also give you an edge over your enemies. Dilate time.
Metroid Prime Remastered proves just how well the original's design holds up, honestly. This is a nearly 2-decade-old game that still feels genuinely fresh once you're back inside Samus's visor. The first-person exploration paired with methodical upgrade gating, you'll see a door you can't open, a ledge you can't reach, and just remember it for hours until the right ability finally clicks it open, remains one of the best executed Metroidvania loops ever built. Combat uses a lock-on targeting system that keeps things readable even in chaotic fights, while letting you strafe and reposition freely, which is a bit clunky to use but serves its purpose well enough.
The scan visor turns exploration into something closer to actual archaeology, too, reading environmental logs and creature data that quietly build out the planet's backstory without a single line of spoken dialogue. Talon 4 itself remains a masterclass in interconnected world design. Zones loop back into each other constantly. The remaster's visual upgrade is tasteful too, doesn't erase the original's atmosphere. It's proof some game design just doesn't age.
From the makers of Black Desert Online comes another game with a desert. Crimson Desert throws you into a genuinely massive, dynamic fantasy world with a desert. And the combat is really the headline feature, a fluid mix of combo strings, horseback fighting, and full elemental abilities that lets you chain together some seriously flashy fights against everything from bandit camps to full-on dragons. Cliff, your default lead, handles like an action brawler protagonist, weighty hits, satisfying parries, but the game also lets you swap between multiple playable characters with distinct combat styles, which keeps things from getting stale over a long campaign. The open world of Pywell leans heavily into environmental storytelling. Weather and lighting shift constantly, and side activities range from village rebuilding to genuinely tense boss encounters that dwarf the player character. It launched with some real rough edges, an inventory system critics widely panned as clunky, though a post-launch patch helped smooth that over. The scale of ambition here is hard to ignore though. This is Pearl Abyss swinging for something closer to a AAA action RPG heavyweight, and for the most part, especially once you're actually in combat, it delivers on that swing.
We don't have to do this.
After all we've been through, it can't be for nothing.
The Last of Us Part 1 is a remake built to bring the original storytelling up to the visual and mechanical standard of Part 2, and it mostly succeeds. Joel and Ellie's faces alone carry so much more emotional nuance now than the PS3 original could manage. Combat stays grounded and scarce. Ammo and crafting materials are genuinely limited, so most encounters reward patient stealth over just shooting your way through infected or hostile survivors. The clickers remain genuinely terrifying too. That sound design alone, the clicking, the way it builds as they get close, still gets your heart rate up, even on a repeat playthrough. What really holds up though is the writing. Joel's slow thaw around Ellie and the ending's brutal, morally ambiguous choice still lands with real weight, no easier to sit with now than it was originally. The improved AI companion behavior helps a lot too. Ellie feels like an actual presence in fights rather than a scripted liability. It's essentially the definitive way to experience where this whole story began, even if you've played the original. Control builds its entire identity around one core fantasy, telekinetic destruction inside a bureaucratic nightmare of a building that keeps rearranging itself around you. Jesse's abilities escalate constantly, ripping chunks of concrete and furniture to hurl at enemies, levitating across gaps, and combat becomes this genuinely satisfying puzzle of picking which piece of the environment to throw next while dodging incoming fire. The oldest house itself is the real star though, a shape-shifting federal building steeped in SCP-style bureaucratic horror, where mundane objects, a rubber duck, a payphone, become genuinely unsettling anomalies through nothing but environmental storytelling and unnerving audio logs. Level design constantly loops back on itself in ways that keep you disoriented in a way that actually serves the tone. The story leans hard into ambiguity. Some players find that frustrating. Honestly, it rarely spells things out directly. But the atmosphere, the destructible environments, and that constant sense of institutional dread make Control one of the most distinct, definitely a strange action game of its generation. Look, I think most people have played this at some point in their lives, and for those who just got out of Vault 101, let's see why Skyrim still holds up. It's the systems overlapping. You're sneaking through a dungeon, you level up sneak, and suddenly the whole combat loop shifts because now you're one-shotting bandits from stealth. That's the trick. Nothing's really balanced, it's just layered enough that you don't notice. The dragon shouts are the same idea. It's not just a cool power, it's a physics toy. You can launch enemies off cliffs, off bridges. It's genuinely funny every time. Honestly, the combat itself is stiff, everyone knows that. The swinging feels floaty and a little disconnected, but the exploration carries it. You crest a hill, there's a ruin, you go check it out. 3 hours later, you're somewhere else entirely with a full quest log you didn't ask for. It's less a game and more a wandering habit.
Bethesda basically built a treadmill you want to be on, and honestly, a decade of mods only made that treadmill weirder and better, sometimes in ways the developers definitely never planned for.
You're on this case with me, Anderson. It's right up your alley.
The victim was one of their own.
Alan Wake 2 is interesting because it's barely a shooter, even though you're constantly shooting. The actual mechanic, burn the shadow with light, then finish with bullets, forces you to manage a flashlight battery like it's ammo, which it kind of is, right? You're always doing this little dance of circling enemies, backing into light pools, rationing batteries you find in dumpsters. But the real hook is the structure. You're playing two characters whose stories bend into each other, and the game uses actual live-action footage, like full FMV sequences, stitched into the gameplay without it feeling gimmicky. That's rare. Remedy's been chasing this found footage meets survival horror thing for years, and finally landed it. There's an anecdote worth mentioning. The game was in development so long that they had to shoot certain live-action pieces years apart, and you can genuinely tell in a couple of shots. Doesn't hurt it though. If anything, it fits the fractured timeline vibe the whole story's built around, like the game's aging alongside its own plot.
First things first. What's your name?
Those who prove worthy.
Uncharted is basically the game where Naughty Dog decided cover shooting needed a grappling hook, and honestly, it changes everything. You're not just popping in and out of cover anymore, you're swinging across gaps mid-firefight, repositioning on the fly, using verticality that most cover shooters just don't bother with. It's fluid, it's cinematic, it's ridiculously confident in its own pacing. The vehicle sections, the Jeep chase especially, blend seamlessly into on-foot combat without a loading screen breaking the illusion. That's the whole thing with this game, seamlessness. Climbing flows into combat, flows into puzzle solving, flows into a cutscene, and you barely notice the seams. Look, the actual shooting mechanics aren't reinventing anything, it's still bullet sponge enemies and regenerating health, but the presentation carries so much weight that it doesn't matter. There's a real sense that every set piece was hand-tuned, like obsessively, down to camera angles during platforming. It's less about difficulty and more about making you feel like the most competent action hero alive, which, for a farewell entry, is exactly the vibe they were going for.
Of course, you're using kids now.
The skyline hook is the mechanic everyone remembers in BioShock Infinite, and rightly so. Grinding along rails above a floating city while gunfights break out below you is just a great idea, mechanically and visually. But the thing that actually holds the combat together is Elizabeth. She's not a stealth escort character, she's constantly tossing you ammo, health, salts mid-fight, which means encounters have this rhythm where you're never fully starved out. Vigors add the chaos layer. Murder of crows, possession, they turn fights into little improvised puzzles rather than pure gunplay. Honestly, the shooting itself is fine, nothing special. Kind of generic cover-based stuff underneath all the vigor flash. What sells it is Columbia itself. The setting does so much heavy lifting that you forgive the combat for being fairly standard. There's an interesting bit of dev history here too. Irrational rebuilt entire sections of the game close to launch because early combat felt too much like the first BioShock. You can kind of feel that friction in a couple of areas, honestly, like two different games occasionally overlapping.
Our prophet fills our lungs with water, so they may better love the air.
Three protagonists. Part 5 of the game series, the switch mechanic is still the smartest thing about this game. You're mid-heist, you swap to the sniper, the camera pulls up and away and then drops you right into another guy's perspective across the map. It's this weird little magic trick that never really gets old. Combat's competent, but not the draw, honestly. It's Max Payne light with worse cover. What makes GTA 5 feel good is the driving. Cars have real weight, and a heist getaway forces you to actually read traffic instead of holding the gas trigger. Heists structure the back half of the game, and they're tense because failure has consequences. Cash splits differently, approaches change the mission layout. Look, the open world itself is the real character here. Los Santos is dense in a way most sandboxes aren't. Side content everywhere, radio stations doing actual satire instead of just filler. It's not a game about one system being brilliant, it's a game about a dozen decent systems overlapping so well that none of them feel like filler.
Taken. Bring him back at any cost.
Sekiro is the game where From Software said, forget stamina management, forget dodge rolling. Here's a posture bar instead, and it completely reframes what combat feels like. You're not trying to whittle down health anymore, you're trying to break someone's guard through relentless deflecting, which sounds simple but turns every fight into this tight rhythm game with a katana attached. The prosthetic arm adds a toolkit, firecrackers to stagger, the axe for shields, counters for specific enemies, mechanical variety without bloating the core loop. Honestly, the hardest part isn't learning your own moveset, it's unlearning Dark Souls instincts, because backing off here just gets punished. Boss fights aren't based on damage checks, they're conversations. You're reading their patterns, parrying on reaction, and when it clicks, it's genuinely one of the best feelings in action games. Dry as it sounds, this is basically a fencing simulator wearing a Ninja Games clothes. Miyazaki apparently wanted something faster and more aggressive than Souls, specifically because he was bored of turtling playstyles, and you can feel that intent baked into every encounter.
No matter how skilled you are, no matter how clever.
The hunting mechanics are the whole game, honestly. You're not just shooting robots, you're studying them, figuring out which components to snipe off before engaging, because a Thunderjaw with its disc launcher still attached will wreck you. Elemental types matter in a real way. Fire weakens some machines, freeze locks others in place, and tearing off a component mid-fight can turn an enemy's own weapon against it. The focus device adds a scanning layer, tag weak points, plan routes, turn every encounter into a small tactical puzzle before it becomes an action one. Aloy's melee is there, but it's clearly the backup option. This is a bow and trap game through and through, tripwires and stealth takedowns doing heavy lifting early on. There's world building tucked into all this too. The ruins you scavenge through are our current world, centuries later, and the game doles that reveal out slowly. Guerrilla built something mechanically dense without ever feeling like a spreadsheet, which for an open world game this size is genuinely hard to pull off.
Vast reaches of wilderness.
Not like you.
You do not know everything, boy.
No. But at least
Kratos ditches the Blades of Chaos for most of the game. Well, mostly, and picks up the Leviathan axe instead, which honestly changes the entire feel of combat. It's heavier, more grounded, way less flashy than the old spectacle fighter stuff. You throw the axe, freeze an enemy, and it just snaps back to your hand when you call it. That recall timing ends up being half the skill ceiling right there. Then there's Atreus. Not just a companion gimmick, he actually pulls enemy aggro, fires arrows on command, and the fights genuinely fall apart tactically if you ignore him. Progression's built around gear stats and runes rather than a skill tree sprawling in every direction, so builds stay focused. The world design leans into verticality too, with the Lake of Nine acting almost like a hub that keeps unfolding as you unlock new paths. It's less kill everything and more methodical, weighing when to engage versus when to just walk past. Norse mythology gives it a mood old God of War never really had. Quieter, heavier, more grief than rage.
Now more than ever, we need a Pathfinder.
Maybe I'm foolish.
This is 3 games with wildly different combat philosophies bundled together, and that's actually the interesting part. The first one is clunky, honestly. RPG-style hit chances hiding behind a shooter camera, powers on long cooldowns that make fights feel like turn-based combat wearing a third-person coat. By 2, it's tightened into something closer to a real cover shooter, but it's 3 where the power combos click. Biotic explosions chaining off tech powers, squad mates timing their abilities into your setups. The remaster doesn't touch the systems, which is the right call. It just smooths frame rate and lighting, so the differences feel like design choices instead of technical limitations. What holds the whole thing together, though, isn't the shooting. It's the conversation wheel and the way choices ripple forward, sometimes years later into completely different squad reactions. There's a neat bit of trivia here. BioWare kept an actual spreadsheet tracking hundreds of possible save file states just to make sure imported choices didn't break somewhere down the line, which is a genuinely wild amount of continuity to maintain across a trilogy.
The parasites are merely a symptom of a greater sickness in Faerun.
Look, everyone talks about solving fights without fighting. Stack barrels, shove someone off a ledge, talk your way past an encounter entirely, and that's true, but it undersells how deep the turn-based combat is underneath. Every action economy decision matters. Bonus actions, reactions, height advantage, surface effects like grease igniting into fire. It's D&D rules translated almost directly, dice rolls and all. So failure's a real constant possibility, not a cutscene fake out.
Larian's approach to reactivity is the real trick, though. Companions notice things, argue with each other, react to choices made hours earlier in ways that feel specific rather than generic. Honestly, the sheer number of solutions to any problem is a little absurd. Like, there's an entire alternate path through some encounters most players will never even find. There's a well-known bit of dev lore here. Larian kept adding content post-launch, patches with new cutscenes and quest fixes, well over a year after release, which is rare for a game this size, and speaks to how much they clearly still cared about it.
How would you feel about helping me kill some evil bastards?
Alright, that's all the time I have for this video. If one of these snuck up on your backlog, honestly, that's the point. Drop a comment and tell me which one I missed, and hit like if you want more videos like this. I legit need all the help I can get.